Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, inshallah, in today's class, we will conclude the book that we are in, the section that we are in, on Istidlal, which is literally asking for proofs and is understood as the other proofs that we have in the Usul al-Fiqh toolkit that are not necessarily agreed upon by the other schools. In today's class, that will be very clear because we're going to take issues 5, 6, and 7, and then we'll have a conclusion. Issue 5 is al-istihsan, which I translate as preferential choice. And this is a big debate in the usuli world because it is something that is advocated by the Ahnaf, by the Hanafis, and something that is rejected by the rest of the schools. Of course, in the Hanafis' defense, and as we will come to see, they will say the way you defined istihsan is not exactly what we mean by istihsan. And in the attempts to reconcile something like this, as you will see even in his brief discussion, Shaykh al-Islam's brief discussion, if istihsan is understood a certain way, then there's going to be no problem with it. And if it's understood the way we think it is understood, because we have the right to define it according to our terms, then that's not going to be accepted. So we're going to talk about that, and the bottom line is he will say if you engage in istihsan as we are going to define it, you're basically a lawgiver. You're a shara. You are issuing law, and we don't issue law. We seek to interpret and follow it. Issue 6 is the position or the madhab of the companions, and that's also an important usuli. It's not like a long line or a long section, but I want to spend some time on it because it might be counterintuitive that, we don't follow the madhab of the Sahabi. Well, what do you mean we don't follow the madhab of the Sahabi? So I want to explain that. Issue number 7 is what happens if people have dreams or inspirations? Can you take Sharia from if the Prophet ﷺ comes to you in a dream and tells you something, or Imam al-Nawawi comes to you in a dream or tells you something, can you follow that or not? And then we're going to conclude with the 4 main principles upon which fiqh is based. He mentions 4. I'm going to mention the 5th, which is the one that's missing, is the niyyah, and he has that in his own commentary. So we're going to talk about the 5 major principles upon which is based all of Islamic law. And then with that we will conclude. Those are the main topics. We'll begin inshallah in the next clip. So we begin the way we always begin, which is, other than my red pen, to say Bismillah. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, he says, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit, Ya Rabb, inshallah, from his knowledge in this world and the next. The 5th issue. He says, رحمه الله والمختار أن الاستحسان ليس دليلا. The chosen opinion is that preferential choice, istihsan, is not a proof. وفسر بدليل ينقضح في نفس المجتهد تقصر عنه عبارته. Preferential choice is defined, meaning defined by us, understood by us, as a proof that is established in the self of the mujtahid, but unable to articulate. There's a very beautiful quote by Imam al-Ghazali. It's in the book that's across from the camera, so I'm not going to go and grab it. I forgot to have it, but I know the quote, alhamdulillah. And Imam al-Ghazali says that if something is clear in the mind, then it has to be clear to be articulated. And that's just a general principle in life. So when you meet somebody or when you find yourself saying, what I'm really trying to say is you're just not understanding me, it means it's not clear in your mind. Because if something is clear, you'll be able to articulate it. If you are not able to articulate something, and look, this happens to all of us. It's not a blaming, but it's just like a thermometer, or a measuring stick for our own self. If I can't articulate something to somebody, that means I have not understood it properly. Oftentimes when you're studying Sharia, this happens. Let's bring the example more close. Oftentimes I'll have studied a lot of things, alhamdulillah, I've read a lot, but then when somebody of the masjid or in a class asks me a question and I find myself struggling, I realize I must not have understood it properly because I was unable to articulate. So I'll go back and I'll look it up and I'll be like, oh, that's the word that I was looking for. And then I'll realize that, that means it wasn't clear in my mind. Or I'll try to write it. So sometimes trying to write it to articulate, because that's a form of speech to yourself, is something that helps. So the problem that we have with istihsan, based on what I just said, is, well, if you can't articulate it, then it must not have been something that's clear. So how can you use that as a proof? How can you use that which you cannot even articulate, that which you cannot even highlight as a proof? That's what he's saying. So let me just read that again. Preferential choice, istihsan, is defined as a proof that is established in the self of the mujtahid but unable to articulate. ورد بأنه إن تحقق فمعتبر. This is responded to, a retort can be made, like from the Hanafis or others. This is responded to that if it is established, it must be articulated. So they're going to say, well, if the mujtahid has come to that conclusion, then therefore by definition it's something that's articulatable. وبعدول عن قياس إلى أقوى, which obviously we don't accept that response. I mean, it goes without saying. وبعدول عن قياس إلى أقوى ولا خلاف فيه. It is also defined. Okay, no, so here is where it gets kind of a little bit dicey, because there are other ways to define istihsan. It is also defined as a type of analogy, a type of qiyas to a stronger analogy. There's no dispute in this. So we're not going to dispute that. If you are going to say that istihsan is that I'm just going to engage in a stronger form of qiyas, but we just slew the dragon of qiyas, all of these. I think well, in the last module, in this module, I don't know how many lectures, but at least 10 lectures full on or more, fully on just the bab or the section afwan of qiyas. So we know that we're always looking for a higher form of qiyas, and the qiyas al-shabah, when something is, it's like this or it's like this, how there can be some difficulty in that, some inherent weakness in that, and therefore the qiyas is where you will find a lot of the differences of opinions in Islamic law, because of the way that people come across, the way that people approach finding the illah, the ratio legis, and the descriptions of the illah. So if you're going to say that istihsan is preferring a stronger qiyas over a stronger qiyas, ahlan wa sahlan, no problem with that. And he says, أو عن الدليل إلى العادة. Or you can say that it is moving from proof to custom, based on some type of maslaha or some kind of common good. So al-adatu muhakkama, as we know, is one of the principles of Islamic law, that custom is something that regulates our life, and we can't live in life without living in custom. So you have to understand that when we say custom, it's not like there's Islam and then there's custom sort of outside. They're more like this, they're like intertwined. In other words, wherever you are right now, there are things about your life and about your Islamic life, your spiritual life, your secular life, that is a cultural manifestation of principles. So principles don't live by themselves unless when you're talking about metaphysics. When you talk about metaphysics, the haqa'iq, that's the world of only principles. But the principle, as it manifested in real life, is manifested through the filter of culture. So the way you dress, the way you talk, the mannerisms that you use, the foods that you eat, how you eat the foods, when you eat the foods, how you respond to different weather patterns in the clothing that you wear, etc., 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 etc. All that's urf, all of that is custom. So sometimes you are going to prefer a certain type of custom because it's in the common good. Some of the examples he gives is about going to a bathhouse or drinking water from a sabil, from a common like water fountain or faucet. These type of things are also permissible if you define istihsan in that way. ورد بأنه إن ثبت أنه حق فقد قام دليلها وإلا ردت. This is responded to, that if this is an established truth, then a proof was found. If not, then it is rejected. So for us, the issue is there a proof? Is there some type of dalil that is from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from ijma', from qiyas, upon which is based this sliding from one issue to another, a stronger qiyas, or from the hukum, from the ruling to from the proof to the custom, etc. If it's based on a dalil, we accept it. If it's not based on a dalil, we don't accept it. And that's the real problem that we have with istihsan, is that if it's dalil based, then it's not really istihsan as we understand it. It's something else. It's following the dalil, which is what we do in Islam. So, as far as the custom, he's saying, for example, if it's established that it was something that took place at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or happened after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Imams or the Salaf didn't do inkar of it, that lack of inkar, that lack of castigation or cast of critique of that act is a dalil. It means it's permissible. So he's saying moving from the dalil to the custom is only an accepted form of istihsan if it's based on dalil, if it's based on proof. فإن تحقق فإن تحقق استحسان مختلف فيه فمن قال به فقد شرع. If preferential choice is done in disputed matters, then one has established a sharia, because then you have chosen something that is more difficult or something that is more easy without the dalil, and therefore you have engaged in that which you can't engage in, which is to establish the sharia. Only Allah Ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam can do that. وليس منه استحسان الشافعي التحليف بالمصحف والحط في الكتابة ونحوهما. Not included in this is the preferential choice of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu in the matters of swearing by the mushaf, or a slave master paying his slave who is trying to free himself, and the like. Because these are things that were engaged by dalil. So Imam Shafi'i talks about, people in government that have people swear on the mushaf. And he says, وَذَلَكَ عِنْدِي حَسَنٍ. And he says, I see that as something hasan. Because it's the mushaf, it's the most important thing that we have. The book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, those type of things inside the fiqh of the madhab, inside of the fiqh of the madhab of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, even though it will say وَإِسْتَحْسَنَ الشَّافِعِيُّ كَذَا أو كذا, Shafi'i radiallahu anhu preferred such and such, that istihsan is not the type that he's negating here. It's the type of istihsan that is based on dalil. There's some types of dalil that you will find in the books of fiqh that will allow it based on the kind of scheme that he has just been talking about. So, part of the problem with istihsan is its definition. Part of it also is the fear that we have of following something that's not based on dalil, and therefore putting ourselves in the position where we are creating law. We are here to interpret the law, not here to create the law. And inshallah, with that, we will conclude issue 5 and begin issue 6 in the next clip. Okay, issue 6, he says, it's just short, so let me just read the whole thing and then we'll do the translation and commentary. قول الصحابي غير حجة على آخر وفاقا وغيره في الأصح، والأصح أنه لا يقلد، أما وفاق الشافعي زيدا في الفرائض فلدليل لا تقليدا. So he says rahimahullah, the statement of a mujtahid companion is not a proof over another companion or another follower, a tabi'een, in the dominant opinion. So I hope you will recall in a past lecture we talked about the mujtahids amongst the companions. The first problem with the companions is that we assume that the companions are one block of people, and they are not one block. I mean, they are a block of people, but within the companions there are different skill sets, there are different types. There is the muhajirun and the ansar. There are the old companions, the young companions. There are the companions that witnessed and participated in the Battle of Badr. There are the companions who died as martyrs alongside the Prophet ﷺ fighting in these battles. There are companions who are the mubashirun bil Jannah, those who are given Jannah. There are the Ahlul Bayt, the family of Rasulullah alayhim as-salam wa ala nabiyyina afdal salatu taslim. So therefore, there are all of these type of companions. They are all companions because the Prophet ﷺ saw them, and with that blessed nadra comes adala. That's how Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah defines the Sahaba. It's not that they saw the Prophet ﷺ, it's that the Prophet ﷺ saw them. They were believers during their life, and they lasted with that faith. Of course, that's a condition, but it's the key is that the Prophet ﷺ saw them, not that they saw the Prophet. Because if there was a blind Sahabi like Ibn Abi Maktum radiallahu anhu, he's included in the Sahaba. So there's a subset of the Sahaba, very small subset, called the Mujtahids. So I think it was either it was, I think it was Al-Bakhit Al-Muti'i radiallahu anhu, who was the mufti in Egypt in the 1920s, who said, it was either him or Zahid Al-Kawthari, who was the deputy Sheikh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire. I can't remember where this is referenced right now. It's either one of those two. It's something I remember reading about when I was doing my PhD dissertation, so I remember it's in one of those two sources, that of the 114,000, 112, 114,000 Sahaba, no more than 16 to 20 were mujtahids. So, the Sahaba, as people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we respect and revere all of the Sahaba for their adala, for their uprightness in being able to transmit information about the Prophet ﷺ. We also know that they are a special class of people because the Prophet ﷺ saw them and interacted, and they remained with that faith. But the stuff that we're talking about, the mujtahids amongst them, there's no more than 16 or 20. So are those, let's say there's 20 just to make it a round number, an even number. Well, 16 is even too, but you know what I'm saying, 20 is just easier. To 20. Of those 20 Sahaba, like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam, these people that are known to have really be fuqaha and mujtahids, Ibn Abbas, etc. Do they have individual madhabs? Can I follow the madhab of Ibn Abbas? Can I follow the madhab of Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam, etc.? This is the issue that he's talking about. So he's saying the statement of the mujtahid companion is not a proof. It's not a hujjah, the way that we're talking about these other things. It's an ijtihad and it's respected, and we could follow it, but it's not necessary to follow it. So it's not a hujjah for the other companions, because the other companions went to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. After the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Rafiq al-A'la, the Sahaba asked themselves, or asked more correctly, the mujtahids amongst them. And in that back and forth, then there emerged the beginnings of the different madhahib of fiqh. So Imam Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu, they are all followed, and then Al-Awza'i, Layth ibn Sa'd, the early mujtahids, these people were following the madhahib laid down by the Sahaba and the Tabi'een that dispersed in the community. Some people went to Kufa and eventually Baghdad, some were in the Sham, some came to Egypt, a few came to Egypt. Obviously, there are those that remained in Medina and Mecca, so on and so forth. So when you come time to the Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu didn't just invent everything. He took this. Abu Hanifa himself met 7 of the companions, so he's a tabi'i technically by definition. So he took from those people, and those people took from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So he says the statement of the mujtahid companion is not a proof over another companion, because in that regard, another mujtahid companion, in that regard, there are mujtahid and mujtahid. So ijtihad la yalghi ijtihad, and ijtihad does not cancel another ijtihad, which is one of the principles that we have. So, and I think he'll talk about that when we get into the final chapter or section. But ijtihad is one ijtihad, and then another person has another ijtihad, as long as they're qualified. Nor is the mujtahid of the companion a hujjah or necessary for the tabi'een and those after them to follow. Which brings up something that's interesting, which is that what we are saying is that we could, we meaning us, not me and you, but astaghfirullah, I would ever claim something like this, but we meaning the people after the Salaf, after the Sahaba tabi'een and tabi'een, could have an understanding that is more correct, nuanced, detailed than the opinion of the mujtahid amongst the companions. And that's why the salaf of the mujtahids like Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa, etc., they would say, وَذَلَكَ مَبْلَغُ عُمَرٍ فِي الْمَسْأَلَةِ. And this is the extent of Umar's knowledge in this issue. Or ذَلَكَ مَبْلَغ عِلْمِ, Abdullah bin Mas'ud or Abdullah bin Abbas, radiallahu anhum, or something to that, with respect. But what we are saying is that, okay, that's an ijtihad, and that we are gaining ijtihad. There's no isma, there is no infallibility other than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So therefore, the Sahaba can make mistakes, did make mistakes, or are shrouded with humanity and contingency the way we are. They have suhbah with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which is a spiritual quality that we will never have, and therefore out of that fact, we love and respect them and revere them, but we are saying that it's not necessarily a hujjah from the legal point of view. And then he says the dominant opinion is that they are not followed. So we don't follow the madhab of Umar radiallahu anhu simply because there is no documented exposition of the madhab the way we have here. And that will come later. But there are positions of Sayyidina Umar that make it into the madhab, of course, without doubt, because the madhabs trace their chain of transmission back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to do that you have to go through the companions. But we don't follow an individual, meaning we don't have to follow. We can follow if the ijtihad makes sense. And then he says, as for Imam Shafi'i following Zayd ibn Thabit in inheritance law, this is based on proof, not following. So this might seem like a little, what is he talking about? Most of the fara'id rules, most of the rules that come from the rules related to inheritance law, come from the ahadith transmissions of Zayd ibn Thabit, because Zayd ibn Thabit was commanded by the Prophet ﷺ to document them. So the Sahaba, different Sahaba had different written, sahif of hadith. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, I think he had a sahif al-sadiqa, the honest or truthworthy folio of hadith, and then the folio of hadith of inheritance law was narrated to Zayd radiallahu anhu. So many of the hadith of the inheritance go back to Zayd. So what he's saying is that when you read in the books of Shafi'i fiqh or in the of Shafi'i himself, and then the subsequent books like the Muzani and others, we're not saying that this is just following the madhab of Zayd, but we have verified the traditions that come from Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu in inheritance law. So he's saying they're based on proof, not following. Because Imam Shafi'i was a mujtahid mustaqil. He was an independent mujtahid. He was a muqannin. He was establishing the rules of usul and interpretation like the other great imams in the beginning, and therefore forbidden upon him was taqlid. That's why he's saying this. It's forbidden for a mujtahid at that level to engage in imitation or following another scholar. Rather, you have to chase the dalil, because Allah Ta'ala has given you the skill set to be able to do that. So therefore, it's individually incumbent upon that person to chase the things. But your ijtihad could match the ijtihad of somebody else. Like Imam As-Suyuti said, I'm an independent mujtahid, but my ijtihad has matched the ijtihad of Imam Shafi'i, except in like a few issues. So he's saying that don't think that Imam Shafi'i here is doing taqleed of the Sahaba. He is engaged in independent ijtihad, but in this matter, his ijtihad is the same as the ijtihad conclusion of somebody like Zayd, which makes sense because it's coming from the same source. Okay, that's issue number 6. Next we'll do 7 and the conclusion of this chapter. We'll pick all of that up inshallah in the next clip bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Okay, issue 7. He says رحمه الله والأصح أن الإلهام وهو إيقاع شيء في القلب يطمئن له الصدر يخص به الله بعد أصفيائه غير حجة من غير معصوم. The dominant opinion is that inspiration, which is something entering the heart such that it is quieted, is something Allah Ta'ala bestows on His select, and this is not a proof for someone not infallible. Who's infallible? Only the Prophet ﷺ. So therefore, if the Prophet ﷺ receives inspiration, either it's revelation, in other words, it's the actual verses of the Quran, or it's inspiration, Allah Ta'ala guides him to do this or to avoid this or something like that. That's, infallible, so that is a form of tashri'ah for the Prophet ﷺ. But everybody else, it's not. Now, this is usually referred to in the literature of usul al-fiqh as visions. Can you take your sharia from a vision? If you have a dream of the Prophet ﷺ or a vision of the Prophet ﷺ, and he tells you such and such or such and such, can you take that as a hujjah, as a proof? And what he's saying is that you can't. It might give you individual comfort. You might, as an individual, without doubt, we would be joyful and we pray that Allah Ta'ala bless us, inshaAllah, with a vision of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But that vision is coming to a vessel that is fallible, a vessel that is contingent, a vessel that is partial, a vessel that is full of the nafs and the shahwa and the whisperings of the shaitan and all of that kind of stuff that marks and shrouds the human condition. So therefore, while The vision of the Prophet ﷺ is a true vision. Man ra'ani fil manami faqad ra'ani. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever sees me in their dreams has seen me. He did not mention that what is stated in the dream is preserved as well. So whatever the Prophet ﷺ tells you, or whatever, let's just make it more general, whatever the vision tells you, it must be placed in the scales of the Sharia. So you read a lot of the hadith masters that they had dreams of the Prophet ﷺ, or they saw the Prophet ﷺ in a waking state and he told them this hadith is sahih and this hadith is da'if, etc. So you would assume, therefore, they used that as a criteria to do tasheeh and tada'if of the hadith. It just guided them and inspired them to do that. But they have to go through the actual work. So if I had a dream and a vision of this complicated division question and the answer was given to me, the answer is 16 and a half, and I wake up, I'm not going to say the answer is 16 and a half. I actually have to write it out and do the work. Okay, so think of it like that. So the Prophet ﷺ comes to a hadith master like a Suyuti and he says, this hadith is sahih. Doesn't mean that Suyuti wakes up and writes down this hadith is sahih. He's going to focus, like for example, the next day or two on that hadith. He's going to look at all these different books. He's like, oh, he's right. That dream was correct because I found this hadith with a chain of transmission that is sound in this collection, for example. Things like that. So it's not a hujjah in and of itself from the Sharia point of view, but it's a hujjah from the point of view that it inspires you, guides you, lifts you, so on and so forth. Okay, and then his conclusion is that in the text, for whatever reason, he only gives 4 of the 5 principles upon which the Islamic law is based, but he mentions a 5th one at the end. So we'll just go in the order that he has it in the book, so I just don't lose my pace. خاتمة مبنى الفقه على. So in the conclusion, law is based on, number 1, أن اليقين لا يرفع بالشك. Certainty is not lifted by doubt. Right? So this is a meta principle of Islamic law, or as it is more commonly stated, اليقين لا يزول بالشك. That certainty is not lifted or violated by doubt. We always default to certainty. To remember this rule, remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that told us, if you're praying like Dhuhr or Asr, or Aisha, I mean any prayer, but if you're in the hadith, it's if you're praying a 4 rak'ah prayer, and you don't remember if you're on the 3rd or the 4th rak'ah, you default to the lower number. Why? Because if I'm doubtful if I prayed 3 or 4, what is the minimum amount in which there is certainty? 3, not 4. Maybe it's 4, but for certainly it's 3. So certainty is what you default to. Then you pray an extra rak'ah, and if you had prayed, if it was actually 4 and you prayed a 5th rak'ah, that's just considered extra reward for you, and you do the 2 sajdatay as-sahw at the end. So I know that I made wudu in the morning, and then I left the house, I went to work, etc., ran some errands, and then dhuhr time came. I can't remember, did I lose my wudu or not? But I remember with certainty that I made wudu in the morning. That's where certainty is. I have doubt that I lost my wudu, so I default to the certainty, I have wudu. So certainty is not lifted by doubt, and this is important because all of our acts of worship are meant to give us certainty when we are worshiping. To pray a fard prayer, you have to be certain you have to have wudu. You have to be certain that the time has come in. You have to be certain that you're facing the qibla. You have to be certain that your clothes are clean. You have to be certain that the place that you are praying is tahir. And then you pray. All of those things mean that you have certainty. So we don't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with doubt. The second one, he says, وَالضَّرَرُ يُزَالُ. Harm is removed. So the Sharia has a nervous reaction whenever there's any harm. It automatically wants to remove that harm. So anytime there's difficulty or harm, we remove it. Another way of stating this is that إِذَا دَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَ. When something becomes restricted, at that moment it becomes expansive. عُمُومِ الْبَلْوَى. When there's just an over flooding of difficulty, at that moment some things that are haram can be halal, and so on and so forth, out of ease. Not that you can engage in the haram, but meaning that if like if you're like in a Muslim country, or you're not going to go to a supermarket that sells alcohol, but in the West everything sells alcohol, so then it's not haram to go to the supermarket to not buy alcohol but buy your food, for example, because of umum al-balwa. So harm is always removed. Anytime there's a hint, a whiff of harm, the Sharia is going to remove it, because the Sharia is here to give us ease and comfort under the umbrella of taklif, of course, under the umbrella of moral responsibility. And then he says, وَالْمَشَقَّةُ تَجْلِبُ التَّيْسِيرَ. Difficulty brings relief. So when things are difficult, the relief comes. So think about you're traveling. There's difficulty in the traveling, so you shorten your prayers. You're sick, so you can't make wudu. You make tayammum. I've hurt my back. I sprained my ankle, so I'm going to pray sitting down. So difficulty brings with it the relief. Wherever there's difficulty, you're going to find a relief in the Sharia on how to resolve your problems, how to find the relief. And then he says, وَالْعَادَةُ مُحَكَّمَةٌ, custom is law, which we talked about a little bit, I think in the second or the first clip, or maybe it was the second clip. So custom is law. The things that people do customarily become law. The way, like I know in today in Egypt, when people get married, the mahar, it's not called the mahar. They give a gift. They usually call it a shabka, which means like you're like locking in somebody, which is kind of like the rings and stuff like that, and then maybe a monetary part. So in the fatwa, Dar al-Ifta, we consider the shabka part of the mahar. That comes from the aida, that comes from the custom of the Egyptian people. Now that in a Sham or in Iraq or in Maghrib, it might not be the case. I'm not even familiar. It might have a different way. So that's something that's localized. It's a local custom. And therefore, when a girl comes and says, there was no nasib or we got divorced, do I have to return the shabka? He said yes, because that's part of the mahar. I mean, that's in the case in which they were married and they didn't consummate the marriage, and she has to return everything. So, well, that's part of the mahar. So the fatwa is that the shabka is part of the mahar. Where does that come from? It comes from custom. That's what the custom is. And then the last thing, of course, is إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. All actions are based on intention, and everyone gets what they intend. This is the first hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, and it's indeed the first hadith, if I'm not mistaken, in the 40 collection of Imam al-Nawawi, or maybe it's the hadith of Jibril. No, I think it's the first hadith in the collection of Imam al-Nawawi, and this is the fifth principle upon which Imam al-Shafi'i based his madhab. So these 5 principles, certainty is not lifted by doubt, harm is removed, difficulty brings ease, custom is law, everything is based on intentions. These are the meta principles of the Sharia, and specifically the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu anhu. If you have done ijtihad, math, and come up with a conclusion that violates one of these 5 rules, then you have done your ijtihad incorrect. So one of the benefits of having these type of principles is that it's a way of determining whether you're right or wrong. If I've created a situation that's gone from harm to worse harm, or difficulty to more difficulty, or I have canceled out some kind of custom, or whatever, or I allowed an action to take place without intention, or so on and so forth, then I've violated these principles, so my ijtihad is wrong. So this is like a stress test kind of to tell us whether our ijtihad is right. And this in itself is its own subject, قواعد الفقهية, which we can talk about at another time. والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, we finished and concluded Kitab al-Istidlal, the book of proofs. We're doing issues 5, 6, and 7, and having a conclusion. So issue 5, which took up the whole entire first clip, was istihsan, preferential choice, and we talked about our definition and how, based on our definition, we reject that, as do most of the other madhab, except the madhab of Abi Hanifa radiallahu anhu. But there are other ways to define istihsan, and based on some of those other definitions, we could accept that. But that, at the end of the day, for us, is really just based on dalil. So for us, we're never going to allow some type of ijtihad that is not based on some kind of proof. And then we talked in issue 6 about the statements of the positions of the companions, the ijtihad of the mujtahids amongst the companions, highlighting that the mujtahids amongst the companions were few, not many, no more than 20, and therefore each one of theirs ijtihad is not incumbent on another one's, because one ijtihad is not incumbent on another mujtahid, nor does one ijtihad cancel another ijtihad. And then therefore, likewise, the ijtihad of the companions is not incumbent to be followed by the descending generations after them, which means that we could come to a different type of understanding based on the qawa'id and everything like that we have, keeping in mind our reverence and respect for the companions for the reasons we talked about, that they are the generation whom the Prophet ﷺ saw, etc. Issue number 7, we talked about visions or inspiration and how obviously we can't follow that in the Sharia unless those inspirations come to somebody infallible, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, in which case it is a form of Sharia. But for us, it's not. It can inspire us, it can excite us, it can calm our hearts, but then we take that and we have to verify it when we wake up or verify it when we come to our senses, because the vision might not be protected. The sight might be protected, but what is said in the vision might not be protected. And then lastly, in the conclusion, we talked about the 5 principles upon which are based all of Islamic law. Everything is based on intention. Certainty is not lifted by doubt. Harm is removed. Difficulty brings relief. And custom is law. And we said the benefit of knowing these principles is that if you've done something in your ijtihad that counters one of these principles, then you know that the ijtihad by definition is therefore wrong. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.